My name is Dennis Morgan with D.L. Morgan and Associates, and what we're going to be talking about in here for the next hour or so, and then we have some room for some questions as well, is that kind of prioritizing our funding or facing the storm, but prioritizing our funding as it relates to pandemic or other kind of issues that PHA is faced with out here as well. Just to give you a little background on myself, some of you maybe have attended some of our sessions that we've done around the country in other forums as well. But my background actually comes from running housing authorities for the first 30 plus years. I've been in the business now for almost 50 years, either running housing authorities or providing technical assistance for PHAs as well, including providing a lot of technical assistance on PHAs that now are doing some things like RAD conversions and so on down the line. But we're here to kind of focus on these changes that are now confronting you and how to kind of take a look at this and address some of your changes as well. So I'm going to come off the screen itself and I'm going to put up the PowerPoints, and everybody should have had an opportunity, hopefully, of downloading the PowerPoints or at least printing off a copy of the PowerPoint out here as well. But I'm going to share my screen. Okay, let me make sure I get this up. Okay. Is everybody looking at now the PowerPoint, or are they still looking at me? Michael, do you know?
We're looking at you.
All right, let me see. Let me try it again. You should be looking at the PowerPoint now. Is everybody looking at the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. And so this is some contact information in case you maybe have questions a little bit later on and all that as well. I'm stationed down here in Sarasota, Florida, so we just came through and avoided the hurricane and all those things as well, which is another piece out here as well. But I want to talk about the very first thing is that your business is not changing, but how you do business is changing and changing drastically as well. And so how do I really prepare for these transitions, and how do I prepare myself for everything that is going on? And I think that one of the things that I want to stress is that these things don't get over quickly. And so I've been through and done hurricane disaster work and other kind of things, and all of a sudden the political elements move on to another issue, or the rest of the world kind of moves on to another issue. But the fact is that you're going to be engaged with this activity on a long-term basis. And so it's how I can think about not only how I do business, but how I really need to change some of my business model. My business doesn't go away in terms of I still have recertifications, I still got validations, I still deal with the federal government. So, all those pieces don't go away. They maybe have delayed some actions or postponed some actions as relates to FOSS or maybe CMAP. But as much as I can continue to go ahead and engage myself with keeping those standards high and not letting myself fall into one of these, what I call these little traps that kind of come along the way, that, well, HUD is waiving this or HUD is waiving that, or, and I need to think that I don't have to worry about that right now. no, you still need to worry about that because it all comes back. And I'll give you cases, examples of where we deal with like hurricanes and things like that, where people are like, well, I got a waiver. I don't have to do this. Well, yeah, but eventually HUD comes back around and says, oh, by the way, all these things come due. All these things are still part of the process. We need to then catch up. So when we're thinking about our programs, think about, in that public housing program or the housing choice voucher program or the things that you administer, mainstream, VOSH, FSS, multifamily. I mean, they're all impacted by what's going on right now. And I might be extending contracts. I might be postponing inspections. I maybe have moved over to a little bit of different platform on the inspections. But eventually it all comes back full cycle where I have to then comply with, all the issues as relates to some of these programs as well. And then I have to be thinking in terms of this operation and how I want to do this operation within a safe environment as well. And it's one of the few elements that I've seen that we've ever gone through where it's not only having to, be concerned about how I'm going to be taking care of my participants in the program and working towards, making sure that they have that safe environment. But I also need to think about my employees and all the things that have an impact on your agencies as well. And, how, if I can't get this certification from a landlord that's refusing to give it to me, well, I might have to go out and mask up and still take an inspection on that unit. I want to use safe practices in terms of making sure my workers maybe are gloved or making sure my workers are masked or making sure that they're asking questions in terms of, does someone in here or has someone in here experienced, had the experience with the virus? But I still have to go ahead and use some of my due diligence in terms of, validating and verifying and doing the things that I need to do out here as well. And I think most will agree that we're moving over towards this new technology platform as well. And I think it's not just thinking about temporarily moving over to this platform, but how my housing agency is going to be moving over to this platform in terms of how they're going to be conducting business to the future. In other words, even on my inspection protocol, I might be moving over to a new platform in terms of how I'm going to be conducting those inspections. And I'm going to be using more of a technology base on those inspections. I'm going to be moving over to a newer platform on recertifications and using more of electronic media on recertifications or using Zoom conferences with my participants on recertifications, and how I'm going to be using a lot of communications via their cell phones as my method to the future, and not necessarily having them have to come into my offices to conduct a recertification or having them validate some of these pieces as relates to that, but they might be taking photographs of these documents and then sending them over to me in an electronic format as my method to the future as well. So it's using your technology and using the base that probably many of you will be moving over to a base where your staff might not even be coming into the offices, but maybe, a day a week or maybe 2 days a week in order to pick up certain things, but still being able to comply with all the other issues that you have out here as well. Much of it also relates to your staff skills, but how I need to be thinking about the future in terms of the training and the staff skills on those training and techniques as well. Sometimes we get into PHAs and it's not just a matter of they can't do the jobs, but it's a matter that they have not been trained on the necessary skill sets to do these jobs. In other words, moving towards this technological database that we're going to be using for the future and how to prepare my staff for using some of this technology for the future out here as well. So your business is not changing, but your business model is changing in terms of how you need to be thinking about not only from a policy perspective, but using your websites more often in terms of the posting of the policies and the posting of the changes, how meetings are going to be set up into the future, even in terms of training. You're going to be doing a lot more distance learning out here and moving towards that distance learning platform for staff, which also means It's not necessarily a 3-day platform where we're in the room doing those pieces as well, but it might be doing them in 2 or 3 hour clips out here, and then moving over to that base as well in terms of how you're going to be doing it for the future. In addition to that, I've always said anytime we get special funding, that we need to be also concerned with how we're then spending that money, because it also comes back where your auditors are also going to be reviewing it. And so I need to be thinking about these things that are eligible expenditures under the CARES Act, and these things that HUD is also saying you can spend your money on your administrative fees to take care of some of these items, or you can spend operating subsidy or capital fund on some of these items that are under the CARES Act. But you can't take CARES Act money and then use it just to spend on regular capital funding or regular operating programs, or I just can't take my administrative fees and just start spending those on other ineligible expenditures as well. In other words, CARES Act can be used to supplement, and I can use administrative fees to supplement these other areas, but I can't necessarily use CARES Act funds to go in and then spend it on paper, just spending it on paper, or spending it on other kind of items that would be an ineligible expenditure under the program. So the first thing I want to stress as well, that you need to make sure that everybody's up to speed in terms of still some procurement type activities and making sure that these are eligible expenditures. And so when we're thinking about that, sourcing and purchasing and protective equipment, all those are eligible type expenditures under the program for your staff and the residents, and thinking about, when they're trying to come in and try to conduct business in your offices as well. Expenses are incurred as using then anything related to the virus issues out here as well and impacting your operation. In other words, potentially even reimbursing them if my public transportation systems are gone down, and maybe they're using Uber or some other method in order to even get to my offices, could be a reimbursable type of expenditure under the program as well, that public transportation now is down and it's going to be down for a period of time. Then I might be looking at alternatives as well. The testing costs for your staff and participating families out here as well, if there is cost associated with it. I know of PHAs out here right now in the state of Florida that were able then to get the state to come in to their high rises and some of their areas where they had a lot of population, and they were able to get the free testing services right then and there inside their facilities as well, or bringing the testing right there to their doorstep. And the state was then providing that as a service, and all the PHA had to do was request that service as well. And I'm sure out here on the West Coast that we also might have that same opportunity to do that as well, because state by state are doing different things, again, depending on your hot zones and what's happening out here as well. Other eligible activities such as some social distancing, in other words, the creation and updating of a plan. And I remember back when I had Lucas Metropolitan that we had emergency plans for disasters, and the pandemic that we're going through right now would fit perfect into some of the things that we had developed early, not just thinking about this pandemic, but I was thinking about, we had a nuclear power plant around our area, so a nuclear leak, and what I had to be thinking about that. And then I would then look at my high rises, and then I would identify those individuals in those high rises that maybe even had special needs. And so when my police or fire or other kind of individuals then had to respond to come to my community, we had already pre-identified within the community those individuals that had those special needs, and that was in the plan. And so that also gets stale. So once a year, you'd want to be updating that plan and identifying those individuals in your community that do have these special needs, that I need to be checking on maybe more frequently than other individuals as well, and have my managers also checking on them as well. But having that plan laid out, and not only having the plan from your perspective, but when we did our plan as well, we would invite in the school system, we would invite in the paramedic side, the emergency side, the fire department side, the policing side, that were all engaged in our planning process as well. So it wasn't waiting for the disaster to happen, but it was all pre-planned, and everybody had a copy of our plan. Everybody knew, when we had identified these individuals as well with these special needs, how we were going to address those kind of issues out here as well, and how we're going to get them down through some of those stairwells and some of those other kind of issues that you deal with during the pandemics or during a disaster as well, because maybe the elevators in themselves are not functioning, or maybe the elevators have an exposure element in there as well that you don't want to continue that individuals to be heavily exposed to those kind of elements. And then I would include things like, the cleaning and the servicing on those kind of common areas or those common elements that you would have in that high rise as well. In other words, they're going to require a daily servicing. Somebody's going to have to come in there and do some additional cleaning. And even on things such as my vacancies and my vacancy turnovers, that I might require even some outside service that's going to be coming in there and do some sterilization on those particular units as a part of my plan as well. It's going to have a cost associated with it. It's an eligible expenditure, but how I need to address that and not necessarily want to be using my own staff, but have an outside source that's coming in and giving me another level of validation and verification, that some of these things are going to take place. But always have a plan, and a plan is not a verbal plan. A plan is a written plan that's laid out by the agency, that's done with you and your staff and done with some of these outside sources, that is then agreed upon that this is how we're going to be doing it out here as well. And I remember early in the process that I saw a published plan that was done by the St. Paul Housing Authority. And it was an excellent plan. It was kind of laid out in terms of not only from a policy perspective, what they were going to be looking at and addressing, but also from a physical standpoint, also how they're going to be handling certain things in terms of not just thinking in terms of emergencies, but thinking in terms of even potential high priority items, and that plan is an ever evolving process, and also probably needs to be revisited every 30 days, because this is not, again, a short-term engagement that we're having in here, but thinking a long-term in terms of what we need to be thinking about from those spaces as well. Some physical improvements to your office space as well, some remodeling of the space. In other words, what I'm seeing out here, that the recertification process might not go away, or my move-in process might not go away, but I still want a move-in process. I still want to fill my vacancy units, because I don't want to wait until December or whenever this thing kind of is phasing down or to the future, but I need to be filling my units as we speak out here as well. But how can I do this in a safe environment? So I may be using partitions. I might be using, how I'm going to transmit documents. I might be using a different briefing process in terms of how I'm handling that. I might be using, a little pass-through area and doing that. I'm going to keep my 6 foot. I'm going to have a table in here. I'm at one end of the table. They're at the other end of the table. I pre-assembled those documents in here as well. I can go over them at a distance as well. They can then sign them. And then I can then make sure that they come back to me in a sterilized environment, or as much as I can, and then, place them in the file as well. So thinking again in terms of how I can do this with my distancing, I can use longer tables. They're at one end, I'm at another end. They're not sitting directly across from my desk, but I can use these kind of modules as well in terms of that space or space requirements as well. I don't have to take them down to the apartment to do the inspection. I've already done the inspection on a vacant unit. I will give them that inspection that I did in here. They then can then validate that when they go into the unit, sign off on the fact that this was a move-in inspection as well, and then give it back to me and send it to me electronically if there's any issues on that unit as well. But again, thinking about how I'm doing this and changing up my business model versus then walking them through that unit that I normally would do a move in or potentially even a move out inspection as well. Cost to facilitate and coordinate with my local schools and local government as well. And not only thinking about the educational platform now that kids are going back to school, but how I can then interface that with additional techniques, inside the agency as well. I might even have, potential stations where that I might supplement those stations as well in my community room by keeping distances on those areas and then allowing them to use some of that technology platform that I've also set in motion, not necessarily opening up my entire community room, but then keeping these in a remote area as well. Even allowing residents to use some of these remote stations out here as much as possible, and then using then, everyday cleaning or an everyday cleansing of that, or keeping those areas where I keep those products out here that they can then spray them down at the end of their usage out here as well. Cost of technology needs for these kind of things. These are types of eligible expenditures as well. Procuring these cleaning supplies or services and maintaining these safe and sanitary, under the HCV or these common areas or unit cleaning out here as well. And HUD has also recently added this in the latest notice as well that just came out. It's a 2020 notice, 2020-18 notice, which also talked about project basing and allowing you to use these products out here now in this project basing out here, where a lot of PHAs are now moving over to that new platform as well. So I always encourage you, revisit these notices, take a look at that 2020-18, the 2020-05, but also you want to look at the COVID-19 FAQs, which were also recently updated as well. And the last publication came out on July 16th of 2020, but they've added some new FAQs out there in terms of some of the things that are eligible type activities and some of the things that are kind of some best practices out here for both you as your agency and your families as well. Relocation of then, staff and participating families then in some of these units as well. In other words, I might even have a family that has a contamination or a quarantine, and I might want to then make one of my vacant units also eligible and say, just go over to this unit, and that's where I want to quarantine. And you come out of that unit in which you have that individual with the potential high risk area, and I can use that other unit as a method to separate that family as well. It's an eligible cost and eligible expenditure out here as well. Transportation to and from these locations to reduce the level of exposure that could be caused by mass transportation out here as well. Some of the supportive services and vendors that also due to COVID-19. I know some PHAs have been using food trucks that will come by their sites and service their families through some of the food trucks out here as well, especially some of my high rises or when I have it already disabled, to kind of break that up where families then can, get that food, but also, keep their distances when those food trucks also show up. I know of other PHAs that are working with the food banks and other kind of methods to have some products or have some food then delivered directly to their sites as well, where the residents then can either pick it up or in some cases the staff actually go door to door and then deliver some of the product, just drop it at the door and let families then go ahead and come out and then pick it up as well. Similar to what Amazon is doing and those things as well. In other words, just knock on the door and just leave it there for the families as well. And using some of those food banks or food bank elements to supplement that and make sure that, the families are still getting some of the nutritional needs that are taken care of as well. The cost of providing childcare for the children of PHA staff who would otherwise be working and children at home now due to school closings or other kind of things are working outside what I call these normal schedules as well is an eligible expenditure. And I know that like myself, you know, I don't have necessarily all my children are grown, but I do have grandchildren. And I know that when they're at the house here and I'm trying to do all my work, it's a little more difficult to get that work done. So again, but allowing then staff, you know, who have these small children, maybe some additional times or flex hours or whatever we can do to kind of still help them get their jobs done with this new environment that they're now working in with the children that are in the house. Because I can guarantee that if you have a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old that you were normally dropping off in a daycare, and now they're in your house literally 24/7, that it is going to be more difficult to get what I call any normal productive time that's done as well. But the cost associated with that. Delivery of goods, including food and medical supplies, and then still complying with some of these CDC requirements out here as well for program participants. Public health related security costs of enforcement orders, of sheltering in place, or maybe visitor restriction policies as well on PHA owned PBV. And then I see that over here on, even on public housing, that you might then set up visitor restrictions on these properties out here as well. That I'm not denying you the ability to go visit people, but I am denying you the ability to have visitors, you know, potentially coming in and exposing the rest of my residents to these events out here as well. Remember that you will still have to address such issues as reasonable accommodations, you know, for our disabled population, still live-in aides, still caretakers, and still take those under consideration. But I want to make sure that we're practicing it as well in one of these safe environments and not jeopardizing the other health and safety of my other residents out here as well. Administrative costs also for Section 8 is implementation of other related activities that are not eligible HCV cost as well, for overtime staff that maybe have to come out and do other things as well. And you'll see that, you know, you're not doing what I call business as usual, and maybe your briefing sessions. You might even be doing those through Zoom conferences, and you might be requiring your staff to do some of those things in the evening time, that and that's going to be their best method to communicate with residents out here as well. So, or using other forms of videos, or maybe now we're posting that video. We now do a video and we just put it on our website where people can come directly to the website and watch those kind of things as well without having to come into a briefing area. But we got to then make sure that we're taking care of reasonable accommodations, that we're also taking care of non-English English proficiencies as well. So LEPs, and making sure we're doing it in all these other languages, or if they need it in another language, that we're also addressing them out here as well, which might cause you to have additional costs. That is a potential eligible expenditure under the CARES Act out here as well. And then if you're not sure, if you're really concerned with some of the things, we can also go directly to the secretary on a case-by-case basis and ask for some eligible type of items that HUD didn't even think about. And occasionally they don't. In other words, they didn't think about project-based in the early days, but now in the second round of thinking, they did. In terms of the program as well, that you also have some foundation notices out here as well, where HUD gives you great flexibility to do other things, such as biennial inspections, such as recertification and your recertification process, regardless of coronavirus. And I've always encouraged PHAs to take a look at some of these policies, what's called these streamlined policies. So we have what's called the waiver policies, and much of the waiver policies relates to some threshold periods that end in July, or such threshold periods that maybe end in December, that I think in all probability, HUD might be extending some of these periods out here as well, especially in light of the fact that in certain areas, this thing is just not going away in any rapid motion out here as well. But when we're thinking about our 5-year plan and our annual plan and submission dates as well, this is foundation upon an early notice, that 2020-05 notice, which also has a lot of waiver provisions in here as well. In other words, not necessarily having to go through that the public hearing type of process in the normal process unless I'm making significant amendment changes to that plan as well. And there's ways in which you can still do the significant amendment change without having, and still keep that distances as well, and still meet the requirements out here as well. Thinking about that family income and composition as well, delaying the annual recertification. But I want to everybody highlight the word delaying the process. In other words, you may be delaying your annual recertification process, but it's not going away. In other words, you still need to be thinking about how I can still get this thing done with as many families as possible without having to delay the actions. In other words, let's say I have my elderly disabled population, and I can pull down the information off of EIV. Well, in that case, I can use EIV that would normally do my calculations out here as well. So why would I want to delay those? I can still keep those in a timely fashion and still complete that process and still meet all the requirements for both the annual recertification process and still be in full compliance and still have everything necessary for the file. And if the family wants a medical deduction, then just tell them, send it over to me electronic, take photos of it and send it to me as well. And I can then process you for the medical deduction if you're eligible for the medical deduction out here as well. So again, sending it out on a platform that I'm not necessarily delaying those kind of pieces, but I might be delaying that for other families that maybe are being impacted by Corona, or maybe they're being impacted in other ways as well that they can't necessarily, take care of it at that particular time. But I shouldn't be thinking about just delaying everybody. I can pick and choose these kind of factors that I'm looking for delaying the process as well. The other factors, such as the annual re-examination and the income verification requirements. And so we know that HUD in the notices as well also talks about that if I can't get access to EIV, then I can use documents such as self-certifications. And here again, PHA's their own worst enemies as well, because a lot of times they say, well, it's got to be, have a notary seal it. HUD doesn't require any of that. That's strictly PHA policy. And so, no, just get it over to me. Even if it's a self-affidavit, I can use it. I can then revalidate later on if in case I have a case of a fraud. But I can use these self-certifications now as my method. And HUD actually moved it up in the plateau in terms of the hierarchy and moved it up to the highest of the hierarchy as well. So you can use it now as a platform to make those kind of changes and make those kind of policies as well, even as a temporary or potentially until this thing moves forward with other kind of practices as well. They also talk about your interim examinations and how you think about your policies on interim recertifications. And so here again, most PHAs say that on an interim recertification that I'll make that effective change on the first of the following month after receipt of verification. But HUD also, and that's again, local policies, that's discretionary policy. Because you can also do recertifications retroactively, or at least implement it retroactively back to the date of the circumstances that maybe had occurred. In other words, my family is maybe delayed because of being impacted and can't get some of this information because of the Corona and can't even get it out and about because of the Corona or because of transportation issues. And then once they do receive it, I have the flexibility to, even under my policies, of going retroactively back to the day that it occurred, so that my families are then not strained by having to pay additional cost associated with their rent during that period of time. HUD gives me that flexibility. I can set that as a interim policy as well, temporarily carry me up through at least December. Plateaus out here as well, or until we see, some of these other things that are changing out here as well. EIB monitoring, in other words, some of the reporting sequences as well. The fact that I run these due diligence reports, such as when a family is duplicate subsidies or other kind of reporting as well, HUD's at least waiving those provisions, at least temporarily. I can catch up with those again later on. FSS contract for participation, in other words, extending the contract and extending the contract through that December and adding additional months to the contract automatically for these FSS participants, especially in light of the fact that they might even been getting ready to graduate. Now they have a loss of income. Now they're not going to be getting their escrow account. I have all the ability of extending those contracts and extending the contract terms and letting them get back and restabilize that so they can get those escrow funds as well. The waiting list and the opening and closing of the waiting list. Again, HUD is waiving some of those provisions in terms of some of the advertising principles as well. And just using your internet and maybe your PHA website in order to go ahead and notify families of the changes in my waiting list or waiting list management as well in the opening and closing processes. You had a lot of waiver provisions as relates to HQS. And some of it related to that initial inspection out here as well. In other words, it's now saying that I can use some of these other provisions. If I've also inspected a unit within the last 12 months, it's been a practice in there as well that I can allow a tenant to move into that unit that was inspected within that 12-month period, with the understanding that I will then inspect that unit, you know, for then at least health and safety issues in that general principle. And I will allow then the payments now to be made on that unit. That's been allowed as a part of a process. PHAs have kind of held that in abeyance and said, well, my practice has really been, I want to look at that unit and make sure everything passes HQS before I start rendering HAP. But there's rules out here that now allow you to go ahead and on that initial, let a family move in and as long as there's no health and safety. And remember that HUD is now recognizing these self-certifications by the owners as well, that there are no health and safety issues, and then I'll catch that inspection as soon as I possibly can as well. So take a look at these notices and combine where I have my flexibility along with some of these waiver provisions that HUD is looking at as well. Your project-based voucher and your pre-contract inspection and PHA acceptance of those completed units out here as well. Again, applying the principles that HUD has allowed me to let a family move in and then allow me then to inspect that unit at a later protocol out here as well, especially if I'm a PHA and I own my units and I substantially control these units out here as well. I should be making sure that, you know, all my due diligence is done, and self-certification would be a method that I can use out here as well. That initial inspection on these non-life-threatening deficiencies. Now, normally these will be corrected within the 30 days, but HUD also has provisions in here which will allow you to go up not only 30, but now take you into that 60-day threshold as well in terms of these non-life-threatening actions as well. The initial and using alternative inspection options as well. In other words, if somebody else is inspecting those, then, you know, using these alternative inspection. And now we have a new protocol that allows me now to also be able to potentially film that unit and use that as my validation of the inspection. I just can't use snapshots, but I can use videos as my method to inspect. And I might even, I can actually use other individuals that have knowledge in terms of the inspection protocol as being able to do that. In other words, potentially my landlord can just take these videos and allow these videos now to be used as your foundation for inspection, probably coupled up with, again, a certification. And I've got now the video as my storage area, and now I can use that as my protocol as well. It's allowable. It's allowable. A lot of PHAs were resisting coming over to a biennial inspection and saying, I just want to keep an annual inspection. Well, this is your opportunity, and now I'm moving over to a biannual inspection platform that I now can do that. I've been in that unit since the biennial regulations have come out. So now I can move it over to a 2-year platform. And now I'll go back and I'll use then more or less in resident complaints or landlord complaints then to be some of my driving forces within that 2-year cycle as well. But it is allowable. It is allowable, and it will allow you to move over to that platform as well. My turnover unit inspections. And we talked about, if I've been into that unit, I can now use that turnover, and it's allowed then for my PBV HAP contract on substitute units as well. In other words, it used to say that I had to go into that unit, had to inspect that unit before I could bring it over as an added or substitute unit under the contract, under the PBV type program. Well, HUD now says you can use in the certification guidelines, self-certifications from the landlords as being my acceptable criteria or other platforms, at least on the interim. But eventually I do need to get in there, and they're using an October 31 threshold date on those. But I have a feeling that potentially some of these things might get extended. But, eventually I can get to that unit and then take a look at it out here as well. HUD is also waiving what's called some of your space and security elements as well. So for example, let's say a family now has another family that's now coming in and they say, I want to add this person now to my voucher because they're being displaced as a result of family members that are now being quarantined and they now need a place to stay, and I can let them come into that unit. Well, for a 4-year, if they're being in the assisted world, I can now allow for what's called overcrowded situations. And don't forget that a living room can be a substitute for a sleeping room as well. So it's not 2 per bedroom, but I can use in the living room as a sleeping area as well. So I might allow even a family of 6 in a 2-bedroom unit. In other words, 2 in a bedroom, 2 in a bedroom, 2 in the living room. That's a family of 6 that normally my policies would say I'd only allow 4 people in there, but we'll allow 6 in here while we're in this corona stage. Now, they do not allow that for an initial inspection. In other words, for an initial, that if a family's eligible for a 3, then I'd want to put them in a 3, not necessarily put a family of 6 in a 2-bedroom situation. However, you could, as a reasonable accommodation, waive that as well if a family has those kind of situations for a live-in aid. For your homeownership option, that initial HQS inspection, HUD is waiving that requirement, but still requiring that I have that independent inspection on those units as well. Other things that HUD is waiving, changes to your administrative plan, that now I don't necessarily have to have board ratification on that, at least at that particular time. I can go in and make some of these changes to my admin plan, and then I will then get the board to take actions, appropriate actions, whenever possible out here as well. Information when a family is selected. In that oral briefing, we talked about using remote or using videos or using your websites, and all they got to do is click on the website in order to watch that briefing as well. The term of the voucher and automatically giving extensions for families to search, because it's going to take a lot more. And I know that some PHAs are also building in some landlord incentives out here and using some non-HUD resources in order to pay for some of these landlord incentives as well. I just saw St. Paul today was advertising and saying they're going to offer an additional $500 for landlords, new landlords on bringing new units onto the program, and allowing that and allowing payment for that out here as well as landlord incentives to engage in the process or the program. And I think they're using non-HUD money in order to do that as well. The approval of the assisted, when the HAP contract is executed, it now allows you to let them come in and allows me to execute the HAP contract after that family has taken occupancy as well. The 180-day provision, HUD's extending that 180-day provision. So for example, let's say I have somebody in the hospital or somebody in a nursing home, and they're going to be out for a period of time. So HUD is allowing that 180 days to go past the 180 days and allowing that to, again, continue to occur. And they're using now a drop dead period of 12/31 for that period as well. And I have a feeling that they'll probably even extend that for certain cases out here, even past that 12/30. So you might want to take a look at that as well. So it's not automatic at the 180 days that I'm dropping them from the program out here as well. Increasing the payment standard. HUD is saying, even if I'm delaying the process for the payment standard, that for the annual recertification, I can still implement the increase in the payment standard as I normally would at annual recertification processes as well. So even if I'm delaying the annual recertification, I'm not delaying the process on implementing my new payment standard as well, which means my family is going to get additional benefits in the program. HUD is also saying that for your utility allowance schedule, that normally you then have to have that whole review done within that 12-month period. HUD's now allowing for extensions under that period as well. The HCV homeownership counseling, I can now allow a family, even though they haven't completed the counseling out here, I can still allow them to come over and use the HCV homeownership. But I would encourage you to still have the counseling component, because you don't want that family to walk in without an understanding of the program, but do it remotely. In other words, set up a video, set up a form of a conference, set up a Zoom, so you can do the counseling through that network, and not necessarily have them required to come into, a counseling agency, at least at this point in time, in order to get that particular service component. For the FUP program, they've also, that youth age eligibility, they've upped that another one more year as well. So if you're running the FUP program, you might want to take a look at that piece of the elements in terms of updating the additional 1 year for them for eligibility purposes as well. Public housing, a little bit different. Public housing also is for your capital fund closeout. HUD's extending that for 1 year, obligation 1 year, expenditure for 1 year as well. For cost and other types of labor, HUD is also allowing you, if you're not a high performer out here as well, that you can now use force account labor out of your capital funds, which if I'm using force account labor as well, think about some of the activities that under the coronavirus that I could all be using, force account labor, or even be using tenants, through force account labor to take care of some of these issues out here as well. I saw the other day where somebody had an FAQ as well on the $200 threshold where, I can pay tenants for services up to those $200 for, and it's excluded income. HUD did not say that they were then extending past the $200 threshold out here as well. But if I'm using a multiple of tenants that are doing different services out here, remember this $200 per month that you can use, that is then not income as well. So be thinking about, how I can then either engage them in what's called stipend services, or how I can engage them with even in force account labor, through the capital funding, which also helps you with Section 3 for that matter as well. Your ACOP and your NACOP rule, which usually says is that you got to give 30 days notice as well. HUD's not saying I have to give 30-day notice. However, you still want to make sure your residents are informed in public housing. If I'm making some of these changes, if I'm doing some of these interim policies as well, making sure I'm getting it out, posting on the board, letting people know of these policies. Even if they're temporary policies, I still want to make sure that I'm keeping residents informed of those kind of activities as well. The community service, in other words, saying that HUD's waiving the fact on the community service that they don't have to fulfill the community service. They're extending that period of time to complete those. Energy audits, they're waiving that provision. If I was coming up on an energy audit on my 5-year process as well, they're extending that out for at least another year. The over income families, where HUD came out with that new rule saying that we now have to terminate families that are going to be over income as well. If they're 120% of median income for 2 years, then it says you're ineligible then for public housing. You're not going to pay flat rent. You're going to pay whatever HUD's going to determine that. HUD's extending that out here as well. Still go forward with putting in your policies. but the implementation has gotten postponed. So as you're updating your ACOP, still make sure you have those policies in place. They didn't waive the policy provision, but they waived the provision on the implementation. Your resident council elections, where every 3 years your council gets reelected, or whatever your policies are, HUD's in extending that out in terms of that election process as well. Same thing on the review of the utility allowance, just like Section 8, allowing for extension for that period of time. Tenant notifications, protecting the rules and regulations we talked about, you know, your methods, posting it to your websites, getting flyers out is my method, not necessarily holding community meetings to have that discussion out here as well, which also means you're probably not having your RAB meetings. So your RAB organization, you probably want to notify them through a different technique so that they can have maybe a Zoom conference as a RAB meeting as well. That would then still meet compliance issues. Don't necessarily have to have them in the same room, but they're all then being briefed. They're all then up to speed in terms of that as well. And you can then document how you then had that meeting as well, but via Zoom or via some other method. Your financial reporting, and HUD's now in your audit reporting as well, extending them for at least 6 months, you know, in terms of the financial audits, and we'll wait and see if HUD's going to extend that out here again, but a 6-month delay in terms of those reporting. Your reporting requirements on the 50058, and you know, you have that 60-day margin out here as well. Well, HUD to move that to a 90-day plateau on the 5058. You might want to take a look at that. But generally, I'd encourage you, if you're doing your annual recertification, still get all those things in on time. Don't delay the process. Keep up with those processes, you know, in terms of the programs as well. As much as I can still achieve out here and not delay, the better off my agency is going to be. In other words, use these new platforms. Don't fall into this world that you're delaying everything from happening. Otherwise, you're going to crash and burn come December. But all of a sudden, everything is going to be, I got to get this done, I got to get this done, I got to get this done, and it's just going to create your next problem as well. Another rule out here that a lot of PHAs didn't think about or didn't implement as well is what's called your 90% rule. Your 90% rule is if you're on fixed income, that if 90% of your income is coming from fixed income, they didn't say that I recertify every 3 years, but what you do is just pull EIV and you can use that other income, that 10% threshold, other income, you can carry that for 3 years. And then every 3 years, I just need to then revalidate that information. That's called the 90% rule. You can implement that rule without coronavirus. And I encourage you to rethink your way through that rule. Here again, pull EIV. I only have to then revalidate those pieces as relates to income every 3 years, and use that other rule as well, which is your asset rule. Your asset rule says I'll validate that at the time of admission, and then I don't have to revalidate that. If the total value of the assets are below $5,000, I don't have to revalidate that, but every 3 years. So they can self-certify year first recertification, second recertification, and then I just need to revalidate it every 3 years. That'll get you through everything that we're talking about right now with these assets, and probably 95% of your families' total value of assets are below $5,000. Here again, you know, don't waste your staff's time getting these statements. Don't waste your tenant's time getting these statements when, in fact, I already have these provisions. I can just put it in my policies, and I can already implement it regardless of coronavirus. And if I want to change it later on, I can still change it later on, but it gives you great flexibility. It's first called the 90% rule related to income, but the second rule relates to validation of assets, which has been about, and it's called streamlining assets. And it's been out now for the last 3 years or so. And you can just put that in your policies and save yourself a ton of time. And it's going to save you a ton of effort out here and save staff a ton of time to get these, that were getting these bank statements all to the tune of 5 cents that they got in interest or 10 cents that they got in interest, that didn't make a hill of beans when it came to the calculations, that you're just sending your staff out and chasing their tail as well. Moving over to as many electronic formats as I can. I generally encourage you to gather all your family's email addresses, gather their cell phone numbers so that you can communicate with them via the cell phones. Remember, I can send them these things via these electronic formats, and it is an acceptable format. HUD says as well, these electronic signatures are also allowable. The only thing this HUD says you can't use an electronic signature on is the ACC, the Annual Contributions Contract. So as much as I'm using electronic signatures, use them. Use them. It's validated, it's an acceptable practice. It's an acceptable practice on contracts out here as well. And these other platforms. Set up your areas where, again, I'm using Windows or other kind of platforms. It's separating me from the family as much as possible. Good area for intake, good area for processing that you still want to do out here as well. And keep those staff safe. Now, I know a lot of you as well will also put the device on your staff forehead, when they're coming into your offices, or put the device on even a resident's forehead if they're coming into my offices. Safe practices. Just like when you're going to the doctor, or just like when you're going to getting a blood work, where they're going to stick it on your head. And if you got a temperature, you're not coming in. It's real life out here as well. And you want to make sure we're doing necessary protection. In other words, maybe even my inspector is carrying one. If I've got to go into a unit that has a resident in place, I'm going to keep my 6 feet, but I might not be wanting to go into that unit unless I'm checking their temperature first. It's an allowable cost. Go ahead and purchase them and use them in the field out here as well. I don't think anybody is insulted out here that knowing that we're using some of these practices both for ourselves and for our residents. We're not trying to spread any of these activities. We're trying to, corral the activities out here as well. And I think residents are extremely cooperative with all the things that PHAs are trying to implement out here as well, and trying to work with you in terms of some of these actions. Using that remote distancing out here as well, and keeping those 6 foot and keeping my areas masked up. I had somebody call me the other day and said, well, a landlord didn't want to give me a self-certification. What can I do? Well, put a mask on an inspector and send them out. Go ahead and send them out and keep 6 feet and ask questions as well. You're still in compliance on that particular unit. Even my landlord's not doing that, so I got to use alternative B. So always have alternative B and alternative C out here and ask those questions. Think about maintenance, but not just thinking about emergency maintenance, but think about high priority maintenance as well. That some of these items are not classified as emergency, but I might have a refrigerator down. I might have other kind of activities that I need to make sure that I'm taking care of some of these high priority items as well. I might still be wanting to do other activity in these units as well. I know a lot of PHAs have pulled everything out of their community rooms and locked them down, but that I might want to be thinking about, how to use some of those stations out there in electronic format out here as well. Still taking care of my vacancies. There's nothing to prevent a maintenance personnel from taking care of some outside work, taking care of vacancies out here as well, still prepping up units. So it's not just, we're only going to do emergencies, but we're going to take care of other items in which you can be operating by yourself. You can still take care of an 8-hour workday and still take care of some of these items that we've been deferring out here as well. I was just at a PHA out here and they were deferring all vacancy work. Well, this PHA is now accumulating a ton of vacancies that it's going to have to address. No. We still want to be sending our maintenance personnel. There's no reason to prevent them from going into a unit, painting it, cleaning it, getting it ready for that next tenant out here as well. They don't necessarily have to be working in a team, but they can be working by themselves, to take care of some of these tasks, or using contractors to also supplement that work out here as well. So Don't think that, again, I just take care of emergencies, but think about all the other things that maybe you were delayed or deferred. You know, I might just be painting a community room versus something that has been delayed. Now I can take care of those items out here as well. Your rent collection, you had that no eviction for, again, and working in, I encourage you to look even on Section 8 at some of the FAQs that can help you through this process on how I can help tenants. The best way we can help tenants and participants is take action as soon as we can on interim changes. In other words, report it to me and I can make these changes. HUD is giving you additional proceeds because they know that your HAP costs are going up. They know that your rents are now going down in public housing. And so they're giving me proceeds in order to take care of some of those issues as well. Therefore, I should be working very quickly to take care of some of these issues. Now, for other cause or drugs or violence, HUD's saying, well, you can still terminate for drugs and violence activities as well. However, many states are also being governed by your landlords. Your judges are not meeting on eviction actions right now. So if you can't get it through the court system as well, through that legal process, it is what it is, and you'll have to just deal with that out here as well through any other form of law enforcement. But you know, if you can't get your traditional eviction done, even on other cause for drugs and violence, then you can't then go set to the street out here as well. There are no secrets to everything that we need to do, but it is going to require training and retraining as well. And here again, think about non-traditional training. Break these down in bite-sized training components. Most staff cannot sit for an 8-hour session or for 3 days a week, 8-hour sessions. Most staff cannot even sit, I'll be real honest with you, for even a 3-hour session. Just like I know many of you are doing other tasks out here as well. You're multitasking. That's okay. That's okay. But when you're doing these sessions, you want to make sure that we're breaking them down in bite-sized areas. And, you know, usually an hour, usually 2 hours, 2.5 hours, probably about maxing out as well. So break them down in bite-sized areas because you got new staff that's going to be coming on. You got to make sure my staff are up to speed. And not only that, but they got to be trained on all these new technology platforms that you're using as well. Everybody's now most people are now over on Zoom, but some people are more sophisticated in terms of these processes. Residents, trained, retrained. So again, bringing platforms in here that can help them understand as well. Come out of your traditional box. Come out of the world in which we were operating and move over to this new world that we're now moving over. It's not business as usual. It's business under now a new platform. The business hasn't gone away, but the business practices are now changing as well. Think long term. This one's not going to go away for a while. And think long term in terms of your solutions out here as well. In other words, I need to be thinking about upgrading my IT systems along the way that is bringing me over to now these new platforms where people are going to be operating remotely, that people are going to be now using laptops in order to do a lot of things out here as well. And not just thinking about they got a station at a desk and they need to be doing this, they need to be doing that, but how to get that technology into their hands, into their homes as well to help me along the way. That kind of concludes my normal presentation, but questions on anything that we have talked about out here as well. Questions on anything. Is my host still on? He was supposed to send me some questions. Let me see if they came up. I'm going to stop my share. You're going to see probably my face again. Questions on anything at all?
Does the 90% rule have to be for move to work only agencies?
Ask the question again. It didn't come through clear.
Does the 90% rule have to do with move to work agencies only?
No. The 90% rule, it came out of what's called FAST, F-A-S-T. HUD published it in a not in a PIH notice, but HUD published it under what's called FAST. And it was a program option if you wanted to do it. And so if you send me an email, I'll go ahead and send you that FAST notice, but you can implement that as a program option. It's not just restricted to MTWs. The way it was evolved was MTWs were doing it. And then what HUD saw is this was a good technique for streamlining and allowed a traditional PHA to also participate in that as well.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Other questions?
I have one more.
Okay,
You
go
were
ahead.
talking about incentives for landlords. What does that look like? Do you so we have obviously management agencies, so would we target those with the most units, or do we just target every landlord?
I mean, you can use selective criteria. You don't necessarily have to open it up to all landlords. Anything that allows you to kind of even streamline in here as well. Remember, I set my policies in motion. Now, my other landlords might call and complain. It's just like when I said, even on biennial inspections, I wouldn't open up biennial inspections to everybody. I would base it upon some form of criteria that, you know, you had no health and safety, or you only, or, you know, that you passed on the first time on the inspections, so that I'm not then letting these landlords where I know that I have a poor tenant with a poor landlord, and I know by the time I get in there 2 years later, it's going to be an absolute disaster and there's going to be 80 deficiencies in that unit. I don't necessarily want to set those up on a biennial, but I can set policies in motion that will set it up on my practices. Let's say PBV. Let's say if I have some standard out here on, you know, you have less than 4 deficiencies on your annual inspection and none of them are health and safety, I could probably set those up on biennial inspections and not have a problem, and not creating my next problem for the agency as well, because HUD gives you great flexibility to set those policies in motion.
So when you said incentives, so we're talking money incentives. Is there a limit to that?
Oh, you're talking about the incentives?
Yes.
I'm doing a piece right now where some PHAs are doing some incentivizing as well. HUD's getting ready to actually publish some things that they're doing with private landlords, especially in the fact that we're losing landlords in our market, in certain markets out here as well. So be watching for that. HUD's actually posted, I think it's on their website out here as well, called some landlord practices, or maybe some best practices. But they are coming out with some best practices, a best practice guide as well. Be watching for that in the near future.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I especially, we use some West Coast authorities for that, because the West Coast authorities were one of the areas that were being impacted by landlords that are saying, thank you, I've had enough fun with you housing authorities, and I'm not, I'm taking my money and going elsewhere. And so we were seeing that on the West Coast out more than in the more in the middle America, but mostly on the West Coast. Other questions? Okay. Michael, you back on?
Yes.
Did any other questions come through?
Nope. Everything seems to be answered.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dennis. We
All right.
appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully it's been helpful. You guys have a good conference out here as well. And if you have any questions, you saw my email on the second slide. So just send me an email and I'll be glad to send you anything that you need out here as well. Again, thank you very much.